Let's get started. We have a lot to cover today. I'm going to start by going over language learning in children. I'll talk first about the stages of language development, from sounds to words to sentences. Then I'll go into more detail about how language develops from birth until the child is about 3 years old. We need to remember that language development differs in individuals, and there are many factors to take into account. However, what I'll describe here is considered the norm for early language development. Okay, how many of you have spent any time around newborn babies? A few of you. Tell me, does a newborn respond to sound? Yes, Terry?
Sure. They react to loud noises, and they seem to respond to singing and music.
That's right, they do. In fact, even during pregnancy, babies have shown response to sounds. For example, to music and to the voices of parents. It's believed that they might recognize the rhythm or pitch of parents' voices right from birth.
I've heard some people say you should play music during the last months of pregnancy, that it will make the baby smarter or something.
Well, I suppose that could depend on what music you play. Anyway, the ability to learn languages seems to be inherent in our genetic code. A baby is born able to make all the sounds in all the languages in the world, about 150 different sounds. However, the baby becomes aware of which sounds occur in his or her language and ends up copying those sounds. Evidently, awareness of the other sounds is not retained. At any rate, they eventually are dropped from among the sounds the baby produces. Then the baby enters a second stage of language learning. This is where the baby begins to attach meaning to sounds, to understand words. The baby often has favorite sounds, e, ma, ba, and so on. Parents help the baby associate sounds with words and words with meaning. The baby begins to connect mama or mommy with the mother, for example, or da with the dad. Babies at this second stage learn where one word ends and where another begins. Of course, the next stage is where the child begins to make sentences. In order to do this, they need some kind of understanding of grammar. For example, they'll say, I want juice, not juice I want. But it's not just grammar children learn at this stage, it's sense. For example, you've probably heard adults ask children, what does a cow say? Or, what does a cat say? And the children answer as they've been taught. But if you ask a 3-year-old child, what does a carrot say? There's a good chance the child will laugh. Okay, let's break it down a little further. At birth, babies recognize sounds. They can differentiate language from other sounds. By 6 months, most babies will make baby talk. This is the nonsensical babbling that we think is so cute. From here, they sort out which sounds are needed in their language and they drop the rest. From about 8 to 12 months, children begin to connect words and meanings. By 12 months, they usually have a small but growing vocabulary. And often they recognize many words and groups of words without being able to produce them. From 18 to 24 months, children learn to distinguish nouns from verbs, which leads to simple sentences. They learn basic grammatical rules, although of course they couldn't tell them to you. By the age of 3, most of what children say is grammatically correct. Although most children won't use really complex sentences until they're 6 or 7, a 3-year-old has already mastered the basics of language. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Yes, I was just wondering. I have a niece who didn't really start speaking until pretty late. I think she was almost 2, but now she's considered to be gifted and she talks like an adult.
How old is she now?
5, going on 6. But she speaks in complex sentences. Her language skills are better than most adults I know. So I was wondering, do some children just start speaking late?
That's a good question, and everyone should make a note of this. Yes, some children don't progress in the normal way. Interestingly, this can be true of gifted children. They may start out on schedule, babbling, for example, but then not really produce much. They may show they understand meanings of words but may not produce them. It seems they never go through the stage of using simple nouns and verbs. There's just a silent period. But then, sometime after the age of 2, they'll suddenly start speaking in sentences. So it's not necessarily a cause for worry if a child doesn't develop much of a vocabulary before the 2nd or sometimes even 3rd year. Good question. Anyone else?